Like I said, I will leave questions for the end. This conversation, just the way it's kind of set up a little bit, it's more one directional at the beginning. My experience are my own, and I don't necessarily speak, definitely don't speak for everyone, but I know that my story has a common thread. I was talking to a dean at Washington State University when I was a graduate student, and he told me, you should call this talk from special education to PhD. And I'm like, oh, that's a great idea. I used to just call it, Latino's academic journey. Before I get started, I want to acknowledge that the University of Montana acknowledges that we are on the Aboriginal territories of the Chehalis and Kalispel people. Today we honor the path they have always shown us in caring for this place and for generations to come. As a person that's involved in social justice and in conservation, both those points connect with me, and there'll be themes throughout today's talk. Before I get into today's talk, I do want to warn people that I am going to be talking about some things that are sadly taboo in our culture, that are uncomfortable for me to talk about. I actually had to ask my family if I could talk about some of the things that I am going to talk about. Specifically, I will talk about mental health issues, suicide, micro and macroaggressions, and racism. If at any point you need to leave and take care of yourself and your well-being, please do so. Do not feel obligated to stay. I will share resources toward the middle end of my talk about mental health resources we have on this campus. So what do I want to do? So right now I have faculty members. I saw some colleagues jumping on. I saw my mom jumped on. She's using Zoom by herself for the very first time. Shout out, Mama Gómez. Woo-hoo! I want to share my story of education and how I've gotten here to teach in the #1 wildlife biology program in the country. I want to share the importance of mentorship, both good mentorship and bad mentorship. I hope that my story encourages any student, regardless of whether you're a graduate student, a first-year student, a senior, potentially a high school student, or at another campus at another university. Some of the things that I will mention will be common for many people of color. And I hope that this is a glimpse into some of the struggles that BIPOC people face, especially for those that have privilege. Now, privilege is this idea in sociology that is a benefit that's unearned. And I want to point out, even though I've had struggles, I've had a lot of privilege. I'm a US citizen born in the United States. I'm heterosexual. I'm identify as a gender I was assigned at birth. I had the opportunity to go to elementary school, middle school, high school, college, master's, and a PhD. I had the benefit of having one parent graduate from high school in the United States. And something that's a little awkward to talk about, I'm lighter complected than two of my brothers. Two of us came out light complected, two of us came out dark complected. And because of that, we navigate the world differently. And all my brothers are full-blooded brothers, right? Same dad, same mom. So like many American story, people that are not indigenous, they start off in another country. Both my parents were born in Mexico, my mom in Tamaulipas. My mom is the one that you can see where the hearts are. That's my mom. She was born in Reynosa, so south of Texas. But as a child, a toddler moved to the United States with her family to pick cotton and was a migrant farm worker. This was in the 1950s. She used to pick cotton with her sisters. Just yesterday when I was sharing this story with her, this talk, she said, Mijo, me recuerdo, I remember being a little kid with my sisters, and we'd have cotton bags and flour bags, and we'd run around the field and collect as much cotton as we could. And I even remember, you know, dancing in the water that planes sprayed overhead, except that it wasn't water. It was pesticides. Probably DDT, because that was commonly used on cotton. This photo is actually from Texas during the same time period. To give you an idea of what time period this is, my mom was born a year before Ruby Bridges was born, a year before the Brown versus Board of Education verdict. My mom was 11 years old when the Civil Rights Act was passed, and 12 years old when the Voting Rights Act was passed. She just retired a few years ago. She actually remembers seeing signs just like this. We serve only whites. No Spanish or Mexicans. Colored people sit in the rear, if they could even come in. And you know what the worst part of this is? It's that she internalized this. And by that I mean that she didn't even think there was anything wrong with this. She just thought that's how it was. Because the reality is that's how it was, but it wasn't right. In 1962, she moved to California, where they were able finally to rent a house and not live in the fields or in the back of a truck. And things became relatively stable. Relatively, it was still the 60s. She lived on the same street that the Association of Mexican Americans was housed. It's where Cesar Chavez got his start. And for the sociologists and history people in the room, Cesar Chavez, while I hate using this as a comparison, it's the best comparison. Cesar Chavez is to the Mexican American community what Martin Luther King is to the African American community in the United States. She remembers, this is where he got his start, by the way. She remembers going and visiting, and he would give candy to the little kids. She even got a chance to meet a presidential candidate, Robert F. Kennedy. Robert F. Kennedy was running for the Democratic nomination in 1960, I can't remember what year, 8, I believe. This is actually the trick I showed her these pictures and she said, oh my God, there's Padre Juan. She recognized Padre Juan, Father Juan on the side there, to the right, on the photo on the right, and then to the far left. This is the same pews, the same area, same altar that my mom had her first communion and first confirmation. She was in the crowd on the left when he was leaving the church. She was a little girl, so she ran in between people's feet and was able to shake Robert F. Kennedy's hand, Robert J. Kennedy's hand. And 5 days later, he was taken from us. While going to high school and middle school, junior high, she faced discrimination and racism. Just yesterday, she shared a story with me that I hadn't heard before. She was in the classroom and the teacher says, oh, I can pick out what every student's gonna be. She looked at all the white students and as they were raising their hand, doctor, lawyer, engineer, teacher, nurse. And then she looked at my mom. My mom doesn't remember what it was, but she knows that it wasn't something good because she left the classroom crying. Even in the 1960s, we knew the ethnic studies programs and bicultural programs empowered students. People were advocating for this in the 1960s, and we're still having these arguments now. I'll come back to that point later on in my talk. This was published in a newsletter from the school district in the late 1960s. And if you look at this, is the La Colonia is the community my mom grew up in, the barrio my mom grew up in. Slum conditions, school segregation, police citizen friction. While we've come a long ways, we still have so much more to do. One of my proud family connections is that my grandfather on my mom's side was one of the first people from the United Farm Workers Union to get a pension. There he is to the right of Cesar Chavez, the famed civil rights leader and labor activist. And there's my grandfather, Cesar Cortez. Now, my mom's dream was for all her boys to go to college. And if you see, we're in order on the left side there. Eduardo, me, Edric, and Edem. You see how the two middle ones came out a little lighter complected. And we navigate the world differently because of that. I've seen it in action. Oops, that got out of order. My mom, when I was a kid, used to whisper in my ear, vas a ser bebé, vas a ser bebé, vas a ser doctor, vas a ser doctor. You're going to be a doctor. You're going to be a doctor. My father was born in the 1950s. This is the town he was raised in the same time period. He only went to 1 year of grade school. Started working on someone else's ranch. They were poor. He taught himself mathematics. And while he only had 1 year of formal education, he was one of the smartest men I ever knew, and has taught me more about building things, working with my hands. The skills that he's taught me have become really useful as a wildlife biologist. He said that he wishes he could have taken us jumping on trains, because when he was a teenager, he would travel the country of Mexico jumping on trains, although he had to jump off before they stopped because the conductors and engineers would beat you up if they caught you. At the age of 19, there wasn't very much work for him. He decided to come to the United States. He wasn't a drug dealer. He wasn't a rapist. He wasn't a murderer. He was an economic refugee. He came to this country and helped feed America, working as a farm worker in southern central California, later on in Oregon. He thought Oregon was so beautiful. One day he said, I want to go there and buy my own land. He got a chance to march with Cesar Chavez in the 80s, along with my brother, who was a little kid at the time, my older brother. If you ever see me on campus, you'll notice that I wear these Latin shirts, almost not exclusively, but almost exclusively. I do them to honor my father. I do them because I like them. I do it to honor my heritage. And I do it because I want to show other people that anyone can be a scientist. I attended 3 universities. And in all those years, I never had a professor of color teach any of my science classes, and I never had a Latino professor, even though the Latinos are the biggest minority group in the United States. This is me and my oldest brother. Look at it. Again, you can see the complexion differences. Whenever I get sad or depressed, I remember why I was brought into this world. My mom told me this story. She swears it's true, and I'm just going to believe her because it brings me a lot of joy. Is that they saw Eduardo playing by himself, and they felt bad that even though he had cousins and extended family, so he needs a brother or sibling. just when, you know, something happens to us, he needs family. So I came into this world to give my brother family, and he rewarded me by being the best older brother everywhere. I was the only kid that was like, yeah, I was 6 years younger, but he took me everywhere. I got to hang out with the older kids, the middle school kids, the high school kids, you know, when he was older. I was always the youngest person there, and he loved to introduce me to his friends. Now, how did I get here, right? I've been talking about my family history, and now I'm teaching wildlife biology. I was 5 years old and watching National Geographic, and they were talking about grizzly bears in Yosemite. And I'm like, that sounds cool. I want to do that. I don't know what that was, either being a photographer, being a videographer, being a wildlife biologist, but I wanted to work with them. And then I remember seeing David Attenborough talk about the Amazon and talking about amphibians. I probably saw a video somewhat like this. Oops.
There are more than 5,000 species of frogs and toads, and they come in all colours, shapes and sizes. Over the years, I've filmed many different kinds of them from across the world.
Frogs are truly fascinating. You may not have thought much about them, and they don't necessarily grab the headline, but there's more to frogs than you might suppose.
And so that started my journey into being a wildlife biologist. But there's a theme in my life, a theme that will repeat itself and repeat itself in the future. Failure, or better way, perceived failure, has been common in my life. For the students in here and the younger people here, failure and success lie in the same direction. Giving up lies in a completely different direction. And we think that, you know, success is this linear trajectory, just, it goes up and up. And the reality is there's a lot of low points. There's a lot of times where you feel like you regressed. So I want to tell you about one of my epic failures. I took pre-calculus as a college freshman, and I failed it. It's not going to let Gómez stop, right? It's not going to let him stop from being a scientist. He took it again, and I failed it. But you know what they say, right? Third time's a charm. So I took it again, and guess what happened? That's right, I failed. Okay, even I, at this point, was starting to feel a little down. I went to talk to my advice from my academic advisor and told him I wanted to go to graduate school, where I wanted to go. And he was like, well, that's not going to happen. I looked for guidance or help, and he didn't give me any. So I went around, and I literally think I was looking at books, and I found out catalogs that you could take high school level math classes in college. You could take math 85, math 95. And I took those classes, and I worked my way all the way up to calculus. And I ended up publishing a paper as an undergraduate student. Granted, it took me 6 years to get my undergrad. But you see, it wasn't that I wasn't capable, it's that I hadn't been given the tools nor the guidance to succeed. I would never have told a student to take the same class over 3 times again in that situation. Someone should have grabbed me and said, hey, let's go back and let's take these high school level math classes and work your way back up. I was on the verge of switching majors because of that. One of my students, there was a Latina and also parent who was farm workers, asked me when I first started teaching, how did I get so smart? And I'm like, giggled, and I'm like, I'm not smart, I'm just educated. I've been doing this for a really long time. I said, if you want to succeed in life, what you need is desire. Desire in the face of perceived failure, or how we Mexican Americans say it, and Mexicans say it, ganas. Tener ganas. Maybe a better way would be to have grit, say it in English would be to have grit. So I grew up in California till I was 11 years old. My first language is Spanish. I went from a town that I thought was small of 200,000 people to a town that actually was small, is still considered small, to the Oregon coast, a town of 4,000 people. We were the third Latino family in that town. I know because everyone let us know, people that I didn't meet knew exactly where I lived. Oh, you live on Ring Creek next to that red barn. I was functionally illiterate. I found this out because, well, I knew I couldn't read, but I thought that was normal. I was in Mrs. Lee's language arts class, and she asked every student to read a sentence, and I couldn't get through nearly any word. I was in special education and had documented reading and writing disabilities. And even in college, I kind of kept that to myself. It wasn't until I got my bachelor's degree, my master's, finished my PhD work, my proposal, started collecting data, and had already taken my PhD exams that I decided to finally get diagnosed. And I have something that's called dysgraphia. It's like the sibling of dyslexia. Essentially, it's hard for me to put my thoughts on paper. So if you see any typos today, just remember that it's that. I tell my students I've been in the field of conservation for 21 years because there's 16-year-old me with my awesome Mexican mustache. I have milt, putting that into the salmon eggs. And I like to share how small the world is. On the photo on the right, same time period, my high school biology teacher on the far right, Mr. Norm Devereaux. There I am on the kind of close to Mr. Devereaux on the right, there where it says Grizz. And there is Adam Mitchell, where it says Grizz, a PhD candidate in the wildlife program here at the University of Montana and a student of Dr. Tom Martin. Again, this is a town of 4,000 people, about a 16-hour drive from here. And I just think it's serendipitous that kids in the same natural resources class both ended up here in Missoula. While in college, I was working way too many hours. Again, I didn't have anyone really to mentor me or tell me kind of what to do in academic. I'm a first-generation college student, and many students of color have issues asking for help. It's not in our custom. I already told you what my first advisor told me to do. Well, he didn't give me any advice. He just said I wasn't going to make it. I asked the advisors, professors and educators in here to empower your students, encourage your students. Ask yourself, what are you doing to lift them up? I remember as a master's student, young Latinos would come to my office for advice, and it would be Latinos from every field. I've mentored about 15 psychology students that have gone on to graduate school, even though I've never taken a psychology class in my life. One student came in and she said she wants to be a doctor, but she couldn't get past biology. And I asked her, well, why do you want to be a doctor? She's like, my dad wants me to be a doctor. And I'm like, okay. So I went to get advice from mentors I knew. I talked to a white mentor that I knew that has been a really good mentor to me. And I asked another professor in my department who was a woman, one of the first wildlife biologists in the field. She's now retired. For one of the first few people to get a wildlife biology degree, for you women to get a wildlife biology degree when it wasn't very common. And she said, well, don't tell her she can't do it. Tell her, just give her options. So I introduced this student into the field of public health, introduced him to the McNair Scholars Program and doing research. This student is now a postdoc in public health. The student has doctor in their name, and they're still in the health profession. Students, find people that believe in you. Here on the left are the people that believe in me. Professor Dittmer in the orange shirt there. I remember I went in to go pick up my midterm, and I picked up my midterm, and he asked me to take a seat, and he challenged me to do better. he said he knew I could do better. It was hard to do better when I was working too many hours, but I reevaluated again. So I decided I need a more stable schedule, and I started working at the university gymnasium from 4 to 8 in the morning. My alarm went off at 3:30, so luckily didn't have to get up earlier than, like too crazy earlier than I had to work. And luckily the gym was literally only a 3-minute walk from my apartment. I remember praying on the way to work because it's just, my body just had that pain and didn't want to be there. I remember actually sweeping the floor in the basement hallway. And this is when I remember thinking, am I going to let a pre-calculus class stop me from getting to where I want to go? Obviously, that didn't happen. Within a year, actually within about 16 months of Professor Dittmer having that conversation with me, I became a McNair Scholar, made it on the Dean's list, got a job as an assistant wildlife biologist, became director of the university's Environmental Resource Center. Within a year from there, I've been accepted into graduate school funded, and also while working at Southern University, along with my brother, who was a freshman, helped Southern Oregon University become one of the greenest universities in the country by offsetting its carbon footprint. At the time, it was only the 3rd university in the entire country that had done that. But see, there's been failures. It's okay to fail. Save your rejection letters. Let your failures be your motivators. Between my senior year and my senior year and my first year of my master's, or end of my master's program, I applied to many different fellowships, mostly while I was at Washington State. My first advisor that I was with for 6 months, we didn't get along. We have a friendly, cordial relationship now, but I went from studying aquatic ecology and fisheries work and decided to start studying amphibians. Life has had its setbacks and tragedies, things that every person in their 20s goes through, or most people do. Edric, who helped me pass the Green Pipes Initiative with Laura Ross and a handful of other people, was I was a senior when he was a freshman. Cool dude. He was, McNair Scholar as well. Had just gotten a full ride scholarship going into his junior year to pay for his education. Decided to work as a firefighter one summer. His helicopter went down when he was getting evac. His helicopter went down because the company said, the contracting company said that his helicopter could carry more weight than it actually could. The man responsible for this only got 12 years, will probably only serve 8, for killing nearly a dozen firefighters. He was a cool dude. He was an activist, a scholar. When I was a first-year master's student, I would send him my papers so he could edit them. He was about 5 years younger than me. If that wasn't hard enough, 4 months to the day that I lost my brother, my father lost his life. He battled mental illness, and losing my brother was just too hard. It was and is challenging for me to talk about this. I asked permission from my mom if I could talk about losing my dad, because even the way we talk about suicide is strange. We say people commit suicide. No, people don't commit suicide. They commit crimes. He suffered from mental illness and he lost his battle. If you're suffering from mental illness, especially during this time period when you're 18, 19, 20 years old, even if you've never suffered from mental illness, it might arise. The Curry Health Center has services for you. I have the suicide hotline here. I can assure you that we would, as faculty, as friends, as people that live in this beautiful Western Montana, in Missoula, care about you, and we'd rather listen to you. Please check out the Curry Health Center counseling website. There's free online screening for anxiety, depression, alcohol abuse, and more. Ask for help. We need to destigmatize mental health. We need to let men specifically, because men die of suicide at 3 times a higher rate, because we live in a culture where men aren't allowed to express their feelings because of toxic masculinity. There's also been success. And while there has been tragedies, obviously there's been tragedies, and they leave scars, time does heal a lot. I was getting to this a little earlier. I applied to 6 different fellowships. I got 6 different rejection letters. And then on a Thursday, I heard about a fellowship that was due on a Monday. And I turned around and I worked up that fellowship. It took me 4 hours, a couple hours with my advisor to look it over. And I submitted it. I got a letter saying that, or an email saying that Dennis Hayes, the co-founder of Earth Day, is going to interview me. I was one of the semi-final, or one of the finalists for this award. I interviewed for an hour. He leaned back in his chair and asked me, "What do you want your legacy to be?" And I said, "I want to help students." At 7:45 the next morning, I get this call, and he says, "Congratulations, Eddie, you won the $100,000 Bullet Fellowship," which at the time was given from for students in Canada and the United States, and only one is given out a year. I now serve on the board of the Bullet Foundation, and I serve as a trustee of the foundation, and I chair the selection committee. I actually mentored 2 of the students that ended up winning. When Dennis asked me, I actually asked to serve on the board during my fellowship award night, and he tapped me on the shoulder and said, "Yes, once you get established." Again, kind of shrank because I was feeling pretty high and mighty that day. But 2 weeks later, or 2 years later, he gives me a call and says, "Estella Leopold, famed conservation biologist and naturalist, is retiring from the board. Would you like to step in?" "Absolutely," I said, "absolutely." By the way, a cool note about Estella Leopold, she's the last living daughter of Aldo Leopold, the father of wildlife biology. I think that got out of place there. I was able to use my research. Actually, I guess it didn't get out of place. I was able to use that money to do amphibian research. Here you see me being very active, carrying amphibian traps, or actually crayfish traps, but I use them to catch amphibians. I use this platform to talk about climate change and amphibian research in Spanish for Washington State University. I got asked to do talks and serve on boards and review scholarships because of this. But even then, I faced microaggressions. I had a friend tell me the only reason I got my fellowship was because you know. And I'm like, "No, I don't know." "You know." And I'm like, "No." I have my friend, "Oh, because you published as an undergrad?" "No." "Oh, is it because you advise the biggest Latino student group in the state of Washington?" "No, no, you know." "Oh, it's because you made a university really green." "No." Even my first full-time academic job, not here at the University of Montana, 5 different faculty there asked me if I was a Spanish professor. One of them, when I asked why they think that, one of them said, because of your shirts. And I'm like, what does that have to do with it? I have faced mental illness, anxiety, depression, imposter syndrome. I was having a crisis of why I'm studying amphibians when ethnic studies was getting banned in Arizona. The same issues that we've been fighting for 50 years. But then I learned, I asked the universe, the creator, I actually asked the cinder block wall in front of me when I was doing my statistical models on an amphibian habitat, and the universe gave me a chance. The universe answered my question. I helped, and a student came into my door, wanted to get mentored to apply to the Bullet Fellowship. I helped them. They ended up getting the fellowship. That same week, my high school biology teacher, Mr. Norm Devereaux, emailed me and said this Latino student is trying to decide between going to Oregon State and a community college. And while community college is great, if you can go to a foreign institution directly, that's really great because the retention rates are higher. And I connected with a colleague I had at Oregon State University. They gave the student a scholarship. That student now is a master's student in history at Oregon State. I asked why I was studying amphibians, and I realized as an academic, I can help my community. Teaching here at the University of Montana is a dream come true. And I just want to share a little bit, because I'm starting to run out of time, about the opportunities that I've had because of science and education. I've spoken at the National Science Foundation through conferences. I've lobbied congressmen and women as a master's student and a PhD candidate. I got to conferences from Florida to Hawaii, paid, by the way. I'm working on a manuscript on monarch butterfly breeding habitat, the endangered monarch butterfly butterfly. I learned how to dance salsa, cumbia, merengue, bachata. I even took some tango classes. I got so good, I started performing in front of people and started teaching my own classes. Because, you know, in college, you can kind of reinvent yourself and you can always continually learn. I got a grant as an undergraduate student to see crayfish battle one another. Yes, I know. I sometimes and often have given this talk across the Pacific Northwest. I've studied amphibians and reptiles in eastern and central Washington, working with some cool turtles along the way. I did research on trout and salmon close to the US-Canadian border. I even was able to achieve my childhood dream of doing amphibian research in the Ecuadorian Amazon and do research on amphibians, specifically chytrid, a disease that's killing amphibians worldwide, with a colleague of mine out of Central Washington University. Don't tell my mom, don't listen, okay, she doesn't want me to do this. Assuming there's a vaccine or infection rates go down, I'll be going to Jalisco, Mexico, my father's home state, and doing some research on amphibians and reptiles with the National University of Mexico. For 10 years, I mentored the largest Mexican-American Latino college student organization in the state of Washington. I used my knowledge as a scientist to advocate against policies that are making climate change worse. I even got to study the endangered horned lizard, which looks like a dinosaur. It's a reptile, but it looks like a dinosaur. Along the US-Mexican border, the same border in the same area that 35 years earlier, my father had crossed. He probably saw a sign like this: no vale la pena. It's not worth it. Don't expose your life to the elements. Remember I said I wanted to do grizzly bear research? That's how this all started. Well, I did get a job offer to work with black bears in Yosemite, but I declined that. But for 10 years, every summer at Washington State University, I would teach grizzly bear biology to students with live grizzly bears because Washington State University has the only grizzly bear research center where we have live grizzly bears. What about that story? My mom wanted me to be a doctor. She told me last night that being a doctor of environmental natural resource sciences wasn't the kind of doctor she was talking about. I tell her she should have been more specific. There's going to be a lot of walls that are put up in your life. The brick walls are there to stop people that don't want it bad enough. They're there to stop other people, not you. I love teaching here. I love teaching at the University of Montana. I'm working on bringing in a chapter of SACNA, Society of Chicano Native American Scientists, although it's pretty much a STEM diversity organization at this point, the biggest STEM diversity organization in the country. I've enjoyed my first semester here, even if we're teaching mass to mass or Zoom to Zoom. If you're interested in SACNAS, you can use, not click on the link, but you can scan the barcode on the top left there and sign up. It doesn't commit you to anything. It just will give you information about SACNAS and that organization and starting a chapter here. I want to leave you with one thought, and it's that I think as this country is coming to terms with issues that have always been there, but people are finally paying attention, is that we need to empower those around us, but even further than that. Empower people you don't know, and whatever that means to you. To me, life is meant to be enjoyed, but I enjoy it a lot more when I'm helping people. Thank you so much for taking time out of your Thursday evening to come and chat with me. I'm going to stay on for a few minutes, answer any questions. You're welcome to follow my professional Instagram where I talk about research, amphibians, science, the deer on campus. So Gómez at Gómez PhD. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Areem.
Thank you.
Thank you. Do we have any questions? Oh, so go ahead, Sabine.
Oh, yeah, I was just about to rattle one off. But yes, thank you. That was amazing. So I have one question from Nikita Williams. That's, how do you facilitate higher education staff to empower students?
Yeah, I think you need to see, you always need to talk to this, you need to talk to students and ask them, what do they need? How can you help them, right? Are there institutional inequities or services not equal? Or do we need to point out people that like maybe need some understanding about cultural biases, right? One of the biggest things, honestly, is just being compassionate and listening, right? When someone tells you that there's a problem, when someone tells you that they're having an issue, listen to them. Now, ways that, that we've done this, that I know I've done this and I've seen other staff do this, is making sure that you're on the side of the students. That sometimes might put you in awkward situations, right? But there's diplomatic ways to handle things. One of the joys about being an advisor of an activist organization as a graduate student is none of the administrators even knew who my academic advisor was, and I wasn't beholden to them because I was a grad student myself. And I felt a lot of leeway to support the students.
Thank you. In this last little bit, I actually had a question. So what gives you the most hope? Sorry, this is my kitten. What gives you the most hope moving forward in the realm of social justice?
The fact that we're talking about issues. Because for a long time, people of color have been gaslit. Essentially, we've been told, even recently, a month ago, I was having a conversation with someone from high school that's saying that there was no racism, in my hometown, even though there definitely was racism. And I love my hometown. It's great, of Oregon. I felt pretty accepted there. That doesn't mean that it didn't have room to improve. And so the fact that we're talking about this, right, that we're talking about social justice issues, that people are willing to learn, and that the fact that it's not, well, I think the change is going to come from the young people. I feel like older people are also listening.
Awesome. I know we're at 5:50, but we just have one last question that I can't pass up from Kao. And Kao asks, our institution has continuously struggled to recruit professors of color. How can you encourage our administration to help hire diverse professors like yourself?
I'll tell you what we need to do is that when professors want to do service and mentorship, that should help them to get tenure. Women and professors of color get asked to do a lot more mentorship and a lot more service, and asked to do a lot more committees work. There's research on this. I didn't bring it with me today, but if you want, I can, actually, if you want, be a student and go look for it yourself. It's out there. And so one of the burdens is making sure that, yes, we should be publishing as faculty members, and we should be getting in grants and bringing in monies or books, or depending on your field. But that service that we provide the institution should also be rewarded and be part of getting tenure. Because if it's not, right, it's not going to help us get that diversity. As my former department chair, out of the goodness of his heart, and this came out of a very good place, said, Erin, you're doing too much student development stuff. You're working with Latino students and doing all this, great, but that's not going to help you ever get a job. As a matter of fact, it helped me get this job. One of the chair of the selection committee said if I hadn't had all that student development experience, I probably wouldn't have gotten this job, because they wanted someone to teach a couple student development classes in the wildlife program.